prepare the front lining if you're doing the removable cup option. So all you're going to do is serge along this opening, this cutout right here. You want to serge along this cutout without cutting any off. Okay, so I've gone ahead and finished this cutout here in a white thread so that you can see it. I used a more narrow stitch length here. You could also use an overlock stitch if you don't have a serger, or you could do a rolled hem on your serger as well. You just want to be sure that it doesn't stretch out at all. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is just lay my front main out flat, and then I'm going to put the front lining right on top with right sides together. And I will stitch along this neckline with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip this over so that they're now wrong sides together, right sides out, and if you'd like, you could go ahead and give this neckline a good press. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing with the center back piece. So I'm going to lay the main piece out flat, right side up, and place the lining on top, right sides together, and I will stitch along the top edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, now I'm just going to flip the lining to the opposite side so that it's now right sides out. And again, I'm going to go ahead and press this along the top edge so it's nice and neat. Okay, so I have all of my finished crossback straps here. These are the lower, these are the middle, these are the top, and this is the straight binding. So as I stitched each of these closed, I made sure I sorted them or placed them beside my machine. Lower on the bottom, middle obviously in the middle, top at the top, and then the straight binding at the top. But I also have the finished measurements in the tutorial for you, so that way you can be sure that your bindings didn't stretch out as you were stitching them closed, and you can cross-reference to be sure you are placing the correct bindings in the appropriate place. So now I am going to take my back side piece, this is the lining, and I'm going to place it right side up, and I have the straight edge here, and this will be the side seam. You can see it's an angled edge. Again, this is right side up, and then I'm going to place the center back piece on top, right along this straight edge. So I am lining them up with raw edges at the bottom. Now remember, your center lining piece was an 1/8 inch shorter than your main piece. You want to make sure that you're pulling that so it's flush with the bottom raw edge of the side lining piece. This will basically pull the lining towards the wrong side of the garment so it's not showing on the right side. And make sure the main is lined up perfectly flush with the bottom raw edge of the side piece lining. And then you're going to take one of your lower X straps and you're going to place it 1/8 inch above the top edge of the center back piece. So I am going to clip this in place right here, and then I am going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to go ahead and baste this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so you can see my basting stitch here. I like to leave long tails when I baste, and I use a lower tension so that I can easily pull those out, because if you leave these in, your sports bra is going to be much too tight for you to get on easily. So then I place the back side piece out of the main fabric on top, right sides together, and I'm going to go ahead and baste this along the straight edge. Okay, so I've gone ahead and stitched this along the straight edge. Now I'm going to remove any basting stitches, and then I am just going to flip this. So that everything is right sides out. Now I'm going to move this to the side. Again, I'm going to grab my other back side lining piece. I have the straight edge on the left side this time, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to take the back center piece, place it on top, lining up the bottom raw edge of the center piece with the bottom raw edge of the back side piece, and lining up the straight raw edges on this side. And then I'm going to take my other lower X strap. And I'm going to place it 1/8 inch above the top edge of the center back piece. Again, I'm going to baste this in place before I do anything else with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I basted this in place right here along the straight edge, and now I'm just going to place the main back side piece on top, aligning at the straight edge, and I'm going to stitch these together along that straight edge. Okay, so I've stitched along the straight edge, and now I'm just going to remove my basting stitches and flip everything again so that it is right sides out. I'm going to once again take my front piece and I'm going to lay it so the main is right side up, and I am going to place my back piece on top with the main back right sides together with the main front. Now the first thing I'm going to do is roll this left side so it's out of the way, because we're going to begin stitching the side seam. So I'm just going to roll this so it's out of the way. Next, I'm going to pull back the back lining, and then I am going to pull back the front lining. So I'm just pulling it away from the main front. And then I'm going to clip the main front and main lining along the side seam. I'm going to clip those together. And then you see here I also have the front lining right here and the back lining right here. Those are also right sides together, so I'm going to clip them along the side seam. Okay, so I've got everything clipped along the side seams. Now I'm just going to go ahead and sew those side seams. When I'm stitching these side seams, I actually like to start at the bottom and go up. I find it's easier with this trued seam right here to keep an accurate seam allowance. Okay, now that I've got my side seams sewn, I'm just going to flip everything so it's right sides out again. And now I'm just going to repeat the entire process with the opposite side. So I'm going to roll this into the center, pull the back lining back to the other side, pull the front lining around to meet the back lining, right sides together, and clip or pin and stitch along the side seams. So I've sewn both side seams, and then I've turned everything so it's right sides out and the side seams you can see are enclosed. At this point, I would highly recommend basting the main and lining together all around the bottom hem. So you'll stitch the back main and lining together and then the front main and lining together so that they're lined up along the bottom edge. Now I'm going to go ahead and baste together along the arm side as well, from front to back on both sides. So now that I've got the main and lining basted together along the hem and along the arm side, I'm going to turn everything wrong side out. And now I'm going to stitch each of my strap binding pieces together along the short raw edge. Okay, so I've pressed this seam allowance open on my binding. I'm going to match the seam of the binding to the side seam of the bra. So I've pinned the binding right side of the binding to the lining of the sports bra. And now I'm going to clip everything else in place. So I'm matching the hexagon marking on my strap binding to the back edge. And then I'm going to do the same thing. The star matches the front edge, this front pickup edge. So I'm going to clip that in place right there. Again, you should have to stretch your binding slightly to fit. And now I am going to stitch along the first crease that I made in the binding on my sewing machine. Make sure you use a stretch stitch here. Okay, so at this point I like to go ahead and remove my basting stitches along the arm side that I've completed so that I don't forget to do that. So once you've removed the basting stitches, you are going to fold the binding up right along the crease, flip it to the right side, fold again along this top crease, and then fold again along the middle crease, fold again along the middle crease, and then pin everything in place. And you're going to continue to do that along the whole length of the binding. So as I'm clipping everything in place along the binding, I like to place pins at each marking that I have for where I'm going to place the crossback straps. Okay, so I have the entire strap pinned closed. I have clips around the entire length of the strap, and then I have pins where the markings were for the crossback pieces. I'm going to repeat the entire process for the other strap. I've pinned and clipped both straps, and now I'm going to begin placing the straps at the appropriate place. So the lowest pin or the lowest marking on your strap is for the other raw edge of the lower X. So I am just going to match that to the pin. Enclose it. I'm enclosing it inside the binding. And then I'm going to pin again. And I'm going to repeat the same thing for the opposite side. Now I'm going to continue doing the same thing for each of the remaining pins and each of the remaining straps. So now I'll take the middle X. So I will place the higher side on the right at the second pin from the bottom. And then I will take the opposite side and place it at the lowest pin. Now for the other middle strap, I'll just do the opposite. The second pin will be on the left side, and then the right side will go to the bottom pin. And I will repeat that for the top X and the straight binding. Okay, now I've got the entire strap pinned and clipped in place, and I've got all my crossback straps in place. Now I'm going to go around and baste all of the crossback straps in place before I do the final stitching. This just helps me make sure everything is in the correct spot. It looks good before I do that final stitch. Alright, now that I've got everything basted in place along the crossback straps, I'm just going to go ahead and top stitch the binding closed, just like I would any regular binding on any other garment. So I like to use my cover stitch for this, but you could also use a very long straight stitch on your sewing machine. I find that using a triple stretch stitch or something like that on my sewing machine tends to stretch out the binding, so it's not my preferred way to top stitch binding closed. Now that I have top stitched all along the binding, I'm just going to remove the basting stitches that I put in before, and then I can continue with the bottom band. We now have the straps top stitched in place, so I'm now going to quarter the bottom opening of the sports bra. To do that, I'm going to fold the front in half to find the center. Place a pin. Then I'll do the same for the back. Fold the entire back in half to find the center. Place a pin. And then I will match the center pins to find the quarter point. Now this may or may not be, depending on your size and whether you've done a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment, this may not be exactly at the side seam. It really just depends on your size. So for me, my quarter point is just barely in front of the side seam. And then I will just set the sports bra aside. Next, I'm going to fold the bottom band in half so that it's right sides together. I'm going to align it at these short raw edges, and I'm going to stitch along that short raw edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I will repeat the same thing for the knit elastic for the enclosed elastic band option. So I've got it folded in half, I'm aligning it at the short raw edges, and I'll stitch along a short raw edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Just a little tip for you, after you've stitched the elastic right sides together, I do that on my sewing machine with a triple stretch stitch, and then I fold the seam allowance open and top stitch that in place to reduce the bulk in the bottom band of the sports bra. I will also press the seam allowance of the bottom band open, again to reduce the bulk. Then I will fold the bottom band in half so it's now right sides out. Now we are going to place our elastic inside our bottom band. I'm making sure that these seams are pressed open. And I just have these clips here to help keep it in place. Now we're going to find our quarter points. So I have the seam right here, and I'll make sure this pin is exactly opposite the seam. And then I'll match the center pin and the seam and place pins at each of the opposite sides to find the remaining 2 quarter points. Now I'm going to once again take my sports bra. I'm going to turn it so that it is lining side out. And then I'm going to place the band inside the bottom of the sports bra, aligning the quarter points and the raw edges. So I like the seam of my band to be close to the side seam, so on this side quarter point. So I'm going to match those first. And then I will continue matching the remaining quarter points. Again, your bottom band should be facing the main fabric, not the lining fabric. Okay, once you have it pinned in place, you will sew the band to the bottom of the sports bra with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So you've sewn the bottom band, and now all we're going to do is pull it out. So it's away from that, and then you can choose, you want to make sure you remove any basting stitches that you have, and then you can choose whether or not you would like to top stitch this seam down. I prefer the way it looks when it's top stitched down because you can do a decorative cover stitch here, or you can just flip it up and it will naturally just press towards the bra rather than down towards the band. So then we have our completed Dani.